Story 1. Great-Grandma. One night I had a dream my great-grandmother and a man I didn't know were in my room. My great-grandmother waved at me, and the man just smiled. He had his arm around my great-grandmother, and that was it. The next morning my mom called me, asking if I had a dream about my Nana. I said, "That's odd. Yeah, I did." My grandma had called my mother first thing that morning and said that she had had a dream about her parents that had felt so real. She sat up in bed, and my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather were at the foot of her bed crying. My great-grandfather had died before I was born, and I don't think I'd ever seen photos of him before. But my mother sent over photos later that evening, and they were the same as the guy I'd seen in my room. In my grandmother's dream, my great-grandmother went to walk forward. My great-grandfather put his arm around her and stopped her. Then they waved, and they left. My mother said that she had also dreamed about them. She said they were younger, in their 60s, the same age they were in my dream. So my mom and my grandmother decided to call my auntie, and lo and behold, my auntie and my cousin had both had the same dream as well. My sister messaged me later in the day. She said that she had had the strangest dream about Nana and Pap-Pap, and it must have been because she missed them so much. I called her and filled her in on everyone else's dreams. Normally stuff like that freaks me out, but we all felt so touched and connected by this experience. There's nothing significant about the date that we had this dream. It was no one's birthday, anniversary, or death day. No one died suddenly after this. Nothing. We're still wondering why that night. Story 2. Haunted Cabin. I've had several experiences over the course of years that could be termed paranormal, for lack of better explanation. At this point, however, this location was the source of most of them. 20-some years ago, I was living near the Canadian border, alone, in a rented log cabin. It used to be part of a fishing resort, and had been renovated since it was built in the early part of the century. The cabin was approximately a half-mile from the nearest neighbor, and 15 miles from the nearest town, so I'd gotten used to solidarity and isolation fairly early on. At the time, I was working PM shifts at a resort 25 miles away, and I wouldn't typically get home until well after midnight. On this particular night, I'd gotten home, put on pajamas, and gone into the kitchen area to wash some dishes. I was standing in front of the sink, looking out of the window, into the woods, directly behind me. Just above the height of my head, there was the sound of a man whistling, just 2 notes, and then nothing. I positively froze. I looked in the reflection of the window in front of me, and saw nothing. Very quietly, I wrapped my hand around a totally inadequate knife that was in the sudsy water, and I turned around. Nothing there, except my 2 cats, sitting by the wall, looking directly into the air behind me, where the whistling had come from. This kicked off many extremely odd experiences in the cabin that continued until I moved out some 6 months later. But that one was by far the most shocking, just simply because it was completely unexpected. I spend a great deal of my time alone in isolated locations, but since that evening I have thought long and hard about what it means to be a woman alone in the woods from a safety perspective. Originally, part of the cabin was simply a single room, all log, uninsulated, with a wraparound enclosure porch on 2 sides of it. At some point, a large bedroom and bathroom had been added onto the north side of it, also uninsulated, and a deck outside overlooking the lake. In the time that it was a fishing resort, however, it was just the main room and the enclosed porch. After that incident, on a fairly routine basis, when I was in the bedroom, the sound of muffled voices could be heard in the main room. They were clearly those of a man and a woman, and sounded conversational, though the words were muted. While I didn't love it, I was content to let it be. I rationalized that any woman cool enough to be at a fishing resort at the turn of the century was probably someone who I would have gotten along with. Aside from the whistling, nothing specifically directed towards me had happened yet. Then came the sound, again muted, of periodic music and singing. Less cool, but I assumed some pretty good parties had been had at this place back in the heyday, and it always quiet, always in the main room. Nothing intruded in the bedroom. Then small items started to go missing, which is tough to do in a cabin with essentially 2 main rooms and a bathroom. They'd always show back up, but in improbable places. Finally, I got fed up, and I asked aloud that the 2 of them stop taking things, and also added that I knew they were there, and I was content to let them be. I asked them not to show themselves to me. I knew that if I actually saw something, that would be the immediate end of my residence there. Finally, the day before I was set to leave for my family's place for Thanksgiving, my landlord was set to head south for the winter months. I was again standing in my little kitchen area when I heard the sound of a door slamming and a woman's laugh, except this time it came from the bedroom. After I calmed down, I got up the nerve to go in there. It was my room, after all. There was no one else living there with me. I found that one of the closet doors had been slammed shut. Moreover, it had been locked, and I had no way to get it open. In fact, I hadn't even been aware that it did lock. I got on the phone to the landlord, hoping to catch him before he headed out. I asked him if he had a key to the closet. He said that he did not, and that it had never been locked, for that very reason. He gave me permission to break the lock if I needed to, and let me know that he'd fix it when he got back in March. I had exactly no intention of breaking the lock on the door after it had been slammed by something, and I spent a very uneasy night before heading out for Thanksgiving. There was absolutely nothing in there that I needed that badly. Before leaving, I stood on the porch, with the door open to the main room, and I announced to whatever may be listening that I expected that door to be unlocked and opened by the time I got back the following week, and that I did not appreciate the intrusion into my room, and in short, I would not tolerate any further shenanigans. I arrived back the first week of December and unloaded my belongings. The house appeared to be undisturbed. Upon entering my bedroom and putting my bags down, there on the wall by the closet hung a small, very old key that unlocked the closet door. I moved out 2 months later, when the plumbing froze solid for a week, and the landlord couldn't be contacted in Florida. In that time, no further disturbances occurred. I should note that I did have roommates for a brief period to help me split the rent for the place. They used the main room as a bedroom. Neither stayed a full month, and neither specified why they left, although one did mention voices several years after the fact. Story 3. A lady who works with my mom told us this story one day when we came over for dinner. We had been talking about creepy movies, and she decided to tell us some of the weird stuff that took place at their new place. They had just bought this house in North Carolina and had moved in. Everything was going fine until one day she opened the silverware drawer and found a tooth sitting on top of the silverware. It was weird, and no one knew how it got in there, but they threw it away and tried to get on with their lives. A couple weeks later, it happened again. Open the silverware drawer, a tooth. Now it's super weird, but again, the tooth gets tossed out and ignored, but it kept happening. Over the next 6 months, they kept finding teeth every couple weeks. They got a home security system with motion detectors and cameras because they figured that they had a particular sick prankster in the area. But even though they kept finding teeth, the system never detected anyone leaving them. One day she's at home, and she gets a call from her husband telling her to get out of the house right then because the security alarm was going off, saying that all the doors and windows had just opened at the same time. She left for a few hours, but the windows and doors were closed. Nothing had opened or closed them. Finally, they got fed up, and they went to talk to the lady who had sold them the house. She still lived in town and had built a house that was almost an exact replica of the one they had sold. That in itself was a little weird, but she completely refused to talk about the previous house, shut the door in their face as soon as they asked about their house. They were not happy, and weird stuff continued to happen every few weeks. So it wasn't enough to drive them out of the house, but enough to be annoying. One of the last incidents that she told us about, she had went down to the basement to do laundry, and when she opened the dryer, there was a tooth sitting on top of the clothes. She said that she felt something cold hit her in the face, almost like getting hit by the cold side of a pillow. She blacked out. Her husband found her a little while later, thrashing around on the floor of the basement. They called the paramedics, and eventually she came back around and was fine. But they could never explain what exactly happened to her to cause her to black out, or what was making her thrash around on the floor. They still live in the house, so I guess we'll see what happens. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this collection of stories. If you did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.